Chapter 6, September 11th, 2001. If the bloke who came out of Bedford Nick in 2005 had a grudge against the world, I think it's fair to say that it was against a world which was itself changing fast. A lot of people were increasingly angry, violently and murderously angry, against the Western world and significantly the USA and the UK. Everything had changed after that terrible Tuesday morning of September 11th, 2001. I don't think I'm being too melodramatic in saying that. It made some big, pretty immediate differences to the airline industry I was working in at the time. Everyone remembers exactly what they were doing that morning when they heard the news, saw the images. That massacre woke me up to a great many of the things that had been happening around me in Luton, but which I hadn't really understood or thought too deeply about. I'm not sure that even now I can get my head around how or why a human being can bring themselves to perform the atrocities that happened in America that day, or what those poor victims went through. Those last moments on those planes, or the dilemma of people in the Twin Towers having to choose between the flames and jumping to their deaths. It still chills me to the bone all these years on. The first anniversary of 9/11 in 2002 saw Al Mahurajan stage a magnificent 19 conference in London. Meanwhile, closer to home, we suddenly had posters start appearing around Luton, glorifying Islam, so-called 9/11 martyrs. I was completely pissed off about that. A lot of Luton people were. The magnificent 19 posters weren't on walls and buildings in Bury Park, on their mosques or meeting places. They were on bus shelters and lampposts all around the predominantly non-Muslim areas. There was only one reason for that: to provoke us, to insult us, to basically say, we can do whatever we like and you fools are too weak to do anything about it. They were right. They got away with it, time and time again, but doing nothing about it, and we didn't. Was in my mind physically encouraging it, our authorities telling them to carry on. The insult, the provocation of it was bad enough, but we were effectively giving it a thumbs up. It was race and religious hatred. As clear as daylight in anyone's right mind, except that in Luton and in the UK there's a one-way street and you're facing the wrong way. Every Saturday outside the Arndale Centre in front of Don Miller's bakery shop, groups of bearded extremists would gather to preach hatred and the death and the destruction of our country. And what did we do? Luton Police? The council? Nothing. Well, that's not quite true. We did something. We let them get on with it, recruiting their own moderate Muslim kids, but also prying on weak non-Muslim people. You'd be amazed how many people were vulnerable to being radicalised. In the years to come, I witnessed firsthand how entire swathes of British society were ripe for the Islamic recruiters. I'm not joking, and I'm not exaggerating. For every extreme Muslim put into the general population of a prison, you're breeding a dozen or more converts. And what is the state doing about it? Jack shit, that's what. Every week in Luton, these characters were celebrating the murder of thousands of innocent people in America, celebrating right on our doorsteps, displaying their perverted insults to all of those victims, rejoicing in the greatest act of terror that the modern world has seen. Word went round town that Muslim students at Luton Sixth Form College were celebrating the killers. Tensions generally were heightened, as I imagine they were in heavily Muslim communities all around the country. As a result of everything that was building, there was talk of reaction by a group of Luton football hooligans. Apparently, there was a meeting in a pub in Dunstable called by the old members of the MIGS, M-I-G-S, and they decided it was time to retaliate against the Muslim extremists. When word of that got out, the police leafleted Bury Park area, telling residents to expect revenge attacks. After that, a young black lad was mugged by a group of Muslims, and it cranked things up to another level. Word got out there would be a confrontation on the day of Town's home game with Rochdale. But on the day, it wasn't just the football lads turning out for trouble, because all the bearded mullahs and their supporters came out in force, as did the police, obviously. I wasn't involved in any of the aggro. I was just aware of it going on. You couldn't not be aware. I suppose it was fortunate in some way that soon after that came the riot in Watford, with a whole rush of arrests and a lull in the activities of the football lads. To a large extent, that element of resisting the Luton Muslim radicals on a local level at least died away for a while. Around that time, I first heard of a Muslim dickhead called Saiful Islam, Sword of Islam. That's a nice name to pick for yourself, isn't it? That's love and peace right there. Me and Saiful would cross swords, and with each other a few times over the next coming years. Just after the Belsen massacre in 2004, a few Luton Muslims, including Saiful Islam, were sitting in a chicken shop in town, doing a media interview, and they were welcoming the day when there would be a September 11th type attack on British soil. They were arrested for this. Don't be stupid. Al-Muhajirin grew in large part out of Luton's radicals. At this time in 2004, it was still a legal organisation led by Omar Bakr Mohammed from his mosque on North London, plus Anjem Chowdhury, and Saiful Islam was the leader of the Luton branch. They regarded Osama bin Laden as their hero, and here they were in a chicken shop down the road from where I lived, praying for the day that their brothers would bring terror to the streets of England. Saiful, his actual name was Ishtaj Alamgir, was taking credit for the magnificent 19 posters and for drumming up support for Al-Muhajirin, raising local membership from 5 to 50 potential killers with the backing of hundreds. It isn't as though this arsehole swept into the town from Saudi Arabia or Somalia. He was born and raised here in Luton, in a middle-class family, apparently a bright student who ended up working as an accountant for the Inland Revenue. And then he was radicalised, gave up the job, and boasted about living on benefits, and he plotted to overthrow the country. If you think I'm overstating this man's evil, listen to the words, they are his. When I watched those planes go into the Twin Towers, I felt elated. That magnificent action split the world into two camps. You were either with Islam or Al-Qaeda or with the enemy. I decided to quit my job and commit myself full-time to Al-Muhajirin. I'm a Muslim living in Britain, and I gave my allegiance only to Allah. He said the aim of Al-Muhajirin is Khalifa. Again I quote, the worldwide domination of Islam achieved by jihad to include terrorism on UK soil. When a bomb attack happens here, I won't be against it, even if it kills my own children. Islam is clear. Muslims living in lands that are occupied have the right to attack their invaders. This man wanted to see our children assassinated, executed, in pursuit of his perverted ideology. And here was the great British public sitting around listening to it, giving him a public platform, and doing nothing about it. I mean, come on, I ask you, what would you do? I had to do something. I'd seen the Magnificent 19 posters. I'd seen any kind of British advertising billboard they took offence to being covered up and painted out. I'd seen them handing out their leaflet in the town centre. These men were running an extremist organisation out of a building on Biscot Road, smack bang in the middle of our town, and not only were the police and council not doing anything about it, not only was the media pretending everything was hunky-dory, they might as well have given them written permission to go on with their Islamic revolution. Things changed a lot for me with the Belsen massacre, watching television images of parents turning up outside school and hearing them screaming as the gunshots went off. Their children were being executed in cold blood. I didn't have children then, but you don't have to imagine what these poor people were going through. The Muslim terrorists pulled these kids' pants down, and if they showed signs of puberty, they were murdered. It's happening more recently in Peshawar, where the Taliban killed 120 innocent children. Still fair play. They're only following their prophet. It's what Muhammad did to the Jewish tribes according to their own scriptures, except he was reputed to have killed 600. It's commonplace today murdering children, as we've seen with ISIS. But even writing this so many years on, it's as though it happened yesterday. Belsen shook me. And then along came this character, Saif al-Islam, preaching that our kids too are ripe for being rounded up and executed in their classrooms, and that he would celebrate it. And we were encouraging him. I was watching this, listening to this, but it was as if it wasn't really happening, as if no one was seeing what was going on except me. I really struggle with that. I don't know how I kept my hands off him. There's a YouTube video where I'm driving a journalist through Luton for the Channel 4 documentary Proud and Prejudiced, talking about the town, pointing out pieces of interest. At one point we drove past Saif al-Islam in Bury Park. It was a warm sunny day and I had the car window down. The cameraman was in the back. Saif al noticed us, noticed me, and started shouting. Traffic is always slow through Bury Park, and he walked into the road, demanding to know what was happening. Look it up for yourself. Google it on YouTube. You'll see him smack me in the face, completely unprovoked. I got assaulted by an off-duty copper, retaliated, and was given 12 months in prison. This bloke, who preaches hatred and murder to British people, walked up and belted me on the chops, on camera, and the police were not remotely interested, not for 1 second. So tell me, will you, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy here? Tell me what part of the law I don't understand. I would have a very satisfying moment when I put the shits right up Saif one morning in Luton, some time later. The police were all over me, yet again, for that, as you'd imagine. But Saif smacked me on film, on the face, unprovoked, nothing zip. At that point, after the Belsen massacre, I started reading online articles and interviews about this group, al-Muhajirin, who were recruiting and sending people to fight for the Taliban. I hadn't realised that. They were basically a Luton product. I didn't think I'd even heard of Anjam Chowdhury at that point, and the thing is, they weren't even hiding the fact what they were about doing, and I thought, who the hell are this lot, and why isn't anyone doing anything at all about it? I didn't know the first thing about Sunnis and Shias, or the differences between them. I might have known that the Sharia court was where you decided to cut your hands off for stealing a loaf of bread in Saudi, but my knowledge hadn't got so beyond that. The thing is, in terms of the real impact on the people of Luton, the Islamic Angel was probably the least of it. People could walk past Saif al-Islam and his preachers outside Don Miller's on a Saturday morning. They might be inconvenienced by the call to prayer, but you didn't have to go to Bury Park if you didn't want to. If only that was the limit of it all, but nothing could be further than the truth. If anything I've written so far makes it sound like Luton was a town run by gangs and gangsters, then that's a good reason. It mostly was, and most of the drugs and prostitution was either run by the Muslim gangs or by gangs that got their drugs from them. It was rife, and it was killing people, and if the drugs weren't killing your young people, then the gangs were. There was a certain helplessness about it all, because everywhere you looked, money was being thrown at the Muslim community, and every problem with their young people, their radicals, their piss and moan stories about deprivation and prejudice was met by either the government or Luton Borough Council, or some other do-gooder, throwing more and more money and resources at it. And as time would prove, the people handing out these moderate fronts would turn out being the biggest part of the problem and not the solution. I think it's also important to ask the question about the other half of the population, because actually Luton does have a few poor non-Muslim residents too. Poor elderly people trying to get by just on the state pension. Councillors and the execs and managers would be queuing up to get their faces in the local paper. Opening a new Muslim community centre here, an outreach project there, and all the time people like Saif al-Islam and the other character, Abdul Kabir Bash, were saying thank you very much and using our money to radicalise both theirs and our kids. Our kids, you say? Don't think that in the brave new British multicultural world that the Islamic poison is just spread within the community amongst supposedly innocent and naive young Muslims. Far from it. Abdul Qadir Bakash is Luton born and bred, and imam for the Salafi mosque in Bury Park. He reportedly has 3 wives, 1 white, 14 children, and I imagine that by now he must be sick of the sight and sad of me. At one time he seemed to be everywhere you looked. He had a seat in the council, he had the ear of the council leaders, this MP, that organisation, a poster boy for the exclusive Muslim community. That was then, but now pretty much everyone has shut their doors on him in Luton because he revealed his true colours. They were happy courting him for long enough, though a typical example of someone painting himself as a progressive Muslim, yet all the while living a different life within the confines of his community. Apparently he was brought up quite a modern Muslim kid. I heard he was part of the youth dance troupe, and then he went home for a while and came back as an outspoken radical. I'm going back a while now, way before the EDL, when my cousin Jeanette was just a young teenager. I was about the same age. There wasn't the same awareness then as now with what happens when white girls being groomed, but she was. Just the same as all the other young girls, up in Rochdale and Rotherham, over in Aylesbury and Oxford. She started going out with a Pakistani bloke, and the next thing you know, she was strung out on heroin, addicted. She woke up on one occasion in a house, being gang-raped by 6 Muslim men. She was found by some prostitute half naked running away from Bury Park, back when the working girls used to hang out in the fringes of the district, although they've all been moved on now. The family got her home, and the police just remarked that she was a drug addict, and basically shrugged their shoulders. Everyone did all they could to help her, but it was useless. They locked her in the house, and she climbed out of the window to go back to the Muslims to get her fix. Jeanette converted to Islam and lives in that community now, apparently with 6 children. No one's seen her for 15 years, at least not that we know. We might walk past her in the street every day, but we'd never know because she's clad head to toe with her burqa and niqab. And it's not an isolated case. It's not just our family. Everyone knows someone in a similar predicament. Another young girl, Caroline, was a stunning kid, a talented singer. She sang at my brother's wedding, actually, but 2 years later, it went down exactly the same path. Her Pakistani boyfriend took her to her mum and dad's to say that they couldn't see her any longer. What do you think that does to parents? But the kids are brainwashed. One of her close friends told her that her family was going to move and take her away with them, away from all this. Do you know what she said in reply?
What? So that men can look at me like meat?
She was already gone, lost her family. It was heartbreaking, it still is. Caroline used to go out with a rough and ready bloke, a bit of a bruiser, Big Mick, who her parents didn't really approve of at the time, but I see her mum now and she asks quite fondly, "How's Big Mick?" And here's the thing, she's had a baby now. The Muslim father didn't live with her, of course, because he already has a Muslim wife. He keeps Caroline in a flat and goes round to see her 3 days a week for a bit of fun. Very holy, don't you think? I talked about that subject once with Abdul Qadir Bakash. I asked him,
"And we're supposed to keep accepting this kind of behaviour?"
The way our young women are treated? He didn't have an answer. Don't get me wrong, because I was no angel while all of this was going on. When I came out of prison in 2005, I came very close to going off the rails myself, with a lot of the leadership of the MiG banged up after the Watford trouble. I ended up doing a lot of organising of the kids, organising the transport, pubs where you'd meet before the game, ways in which we'd try to avoid the police. That's how, when we formed the United People of Luton in 2009 to make a stand against the Muslim protests over the homecoming parade of the Royal Anglican Regiment, I was perfectly placed to pull things together. I was hanging out at the 9 Bar pub in the town centre and even ran a football team from there. It was almost like a second home. We had sofas in there and the Nandos across the road. Heaven. We wouldn't even drink much, just hang out mostly. But there was partying and raving too, and there was usually cocaine about and MDMA, ecstasy. I'd never done drugs before I went to jail, but when I came out, having to fend for myself, hating the world, I ran with lads who did recreational drugs. It was part of the scene, and I was part of it. It's been a long time since I did anything like that. Does it make me a hypocrite? Given where I've already said most of the drugs came from, I'm sure it does. Although, such as I've ever done, joined up thinking and reasoning, that wasn't the time or place. There was no plan, it was just day-to-day life and gut reaction. Heroin was always completely off limits though. One night I was walking through the town when a female officer in a police van told her colleagues to stop and search me. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but she knew who I was. They found a trace of cocaine, just enough to make her hamster pedal wheel a bit faster. But that's all. I got a £300 fine, and for the future enemies of Tommy Robinson, my record was elevated into something close to a level of a Colombian drug baron. The Labour Lib Dem leader, Nick Clegg, wants that stuff making legal, doesn't he? Do you think he fancies going on telly to start a campaign to have my conviction overturned? No, I don't think so. I was angry at that time at what had happened in Luton, but I was curious, so I started trying to find out more about these people, and during that process of looking into what lay behind Belson, it seemed that the only people talking about it, getting angry, were the BNP, and I didn't know anything much more about them at that time. Much is made by the Tommy Robinson haters of my brief flirtation with the BNP. It was brief, very brief, and it ended in tears too. They are a complete set of wankers, that's all. That lot.